Heinrich Himmler.
Heinrich Luitpold Himmler. October 7, 1900–May 23, 1945, was Reichsführer of the Schutzstaffel, a military commander, and a leading member of the Nazi Party of Nazi Germany. Nazi leader Adolf Hitler later appointed him commander of the replacement army and general plenipotentiary for the administration of the entire Third Reich. Himmler was one of the most powerful men in Nazi Germany and one of the persons most directly responsible for the Holocaust. As a member of a reserve battalion during World War I, Himmler did Nazi active service. He studied agronomy in college, and joined the Nazi Party in 1923 and the SS in 1925. In 1929, he was appointed Reichsführer-SS by Hitler. Over the next 16 years, he developed the SS from a mere 290-man battalion into a powerful group with its own military, and, following Hitler's orders, set up and controlled the Nazi concentration camps. He was known to have good organizational skills and for selecting highly competent subordinates, such as Reinhard Heydrich in 1931. From 1943 forward, he was both Chief of German Police and Minister of the Interior, overseeing all internal and external police and security forces, including the Gestapo, secret state police. On Hitler's behalf, Himmler formed the Einsatzgruppen and built extermination camps. As facilitator and overseer of the concentration camps, Himmler directed the killing of some 6 million Jews, between 200,000 and 500,000 Romani people, and other victims. The total number of civilians killed by the regime is estimated at 11 to 14 million people. Most of them were Polish and Soviet citizens. Late in World War II, Hitler charged Himmler with the command of the Army Group Upper Rhine and the Army Group Vistula. He failed to achieve his assigned objectives and Hitler replaced him in these posts. Shortly before the end of the war, realizing that the war was lost, he attempted to open peace talks with the Western Allies without Hitler's knowledge. Hearing of this, Hitler dismissed him from all his posts in April 1945 and ordered his arrest. Himmler attempted to go into hiding, but was detained and then arrested by British forces once his identity became known. While in British custody, he committed suicide on May 23, 1945.
Early life.
Heinrich Luitpold Himmler was born in Munich on October 7, 1900 to a conservative Roman Catholic middle-class family. His father was Gerhard Himmler, a teacher, and his mother was Anna Maria Himmler, née Heider, a devout Roman Catholic. His older brother, Gerhard Ludwig, was born in July 1898, and his younger brother, Ernst, was born in 1905. Himmler's first name, Heinrich, was the same as that of his godfather, Prince Heinrich of Bavaria of the royal family of Bavaria, who was tutored by Gerhard Himmler. He attended a grammar school in Landshut where his father was deputy principal. While he did well in his schoolwork, he struggled in athletics. His health was poor, with lifelong stomach complaints and other ailments. He trained daily with weights as a youth and exercised to become stronger. Fellow students remembered him as studious and awkward in social situations. Himmler's diary, which he kept intermittently from age 10, shows that he took a keen interest in current events, dueling, and the serious discussion of religion and sex. In 1915, he began training with the Landshut Cadet Corps. His father used his connections with the royal family to get Himmler accepted as an officer candidate, and he enlisted with the reserve battalion of the 11th Bavarian Regiment in December 1917. His brother, Gerhard, served on the Western Front and saw combat. He received the Iron Cross and was eventually promoted to lieutenant. In November 1918, while Himmler was still in training, the war ended with Germany's defeat, denying him the opportunity to become an officer or see combat. After his discharge on December 18, he returned to Landshut. After the war, Himmler completed his grammar school education. From 1919 to 1922, he studied agronomy at the Munich Technische Hochschule, now Technical University Munich, following a brief apprenticeship on a farm and a subsequent illness. Although many regulations that discriminated against non-Christians, including Jews and other minority groups, had been eliminated during the unification of Germany in 1871, antisemitism continued to exist and thrive in Germany and other parts of Europe. Himmler was anti-Semitic by the time he went to university, but not exceptionally so. Students at his school would avoid their Jewish classmates. He remained a devoted Catholic while a student, and spent most of his leisure time with members of his fencing fraternity, the League of Apollo, the president of which was Jewish. Himmler maintained a polite demeanor within and with Jewish members of the fraternity, in spite of his growing anti-Semitism. During his second year at university, Himmler redoubled his attempts to pursue a military career. Although he was not successful, he was able to extend his involvement in the paramilitary scene in Munich. It was at this time that he first met Ernst Röhm, an early member of the Nazi Party and co-founder of the Sturmabteilung, Storm Battalion. SA. Himmler admired Röhm because he was a decorated combat soldier, and at his suggestion, Himmler joined his anti-Semitic nationalist group, the Reichskriegsflag. In 1922, Himmler became more interested in the Jewish question, with his diary entries containing an increasing number of anti-Semitic remarks and recording a number of discussions about Jews with his classmates. His reading lists, as recorded in his diary, were dominated by anti-Semitic pamphlets, German myths, and occult tracts. After the murder of Foreign Minister Walter Rathenau on June 24, Himmler's political views veered towards the radical right, and he took part in demonstrations against the Treaty of Versailles. Hyperinflation was raging that summer, and his parents could no longer afford to keep all three sons in school. Disappointed by his failure to make a career in the military and his parents' inability to finance his doctoral studies, he was forced to take a low-paying office job after obtaining his agricultural diploma. He remained in this position until September 1923.
Nazi activist.
Himmler joined the Nazi Party, NSDAP, in August 1923. His party number was 14,303. As a member of Röhm's paramilitary unit, Himmler was involved in the Beerhell-Putsch, an unsuccessful attempt by Hitler and the NSDAP to seize power in Munich. This event would set Himmler on a life of politics. He was questioned by the police about his role in the putsch, but was not charged because of insufficient evidence. But he lost his job, was unable to find employment as an agronomist, and had to move in with his parents in Munich. Frustrated by these failures, he became ever more irritable, aggressive, and opinionated, alienating both friends and family members. Indiana, 1923-24, Himmler, while searching for a worldview, moved away from Catholicism and furthered his interest both in the occult and in anti-Semitism. Germanic mythology, reinforced by occult ideas, became a substitute religion for him. Himmler found the NSDAP appealing because its political positions agreed with his own views. Initially, he was not swept up by Hitler's charisma or the cult of Führer worship. As he learned more about Hitler through his reading, he began to regard him as a useful face of the party, and he later admired and even worshipped him. To consolidate and advance his own position in the NSDAP, Himmler took advantage of the disarray in the party following Hitler's arrest in the wake of the Beerhell-Putsch. From mid-1924 he worked under Gregor Strasser as a party secretary and propaganda assistant. Traveling all over Bavaria agitating for the party, he gave speeches and distributed literature. Placed in charge of the party office in Lower Bavaria by Strasser from late 1924, he was responsible for integrating the area's membership with the NSDAP under Hitler when the party was refounded in February 1925. That same year, he joined the Schutzstaffel, SS, as an SS Führer, SS leader. His SS number was 168. The SS, initially part of the much larger SA, was formed in 1923 for Hitler's personal protection, and was reformed in 1925 as an elite unit of the SA. Himmler's first leadership position in the SS was that of SS-Führer, district leader, in Lower Bavaria from 1926. Strasser appointed Himmler deputy propaganda chief in January 1927. As was typical in the NSDAP, he had considerable freedom of action in his post, which increased over time. He began to collect statistics on the number of Jews, Freemasons, and enemies of the party, and following his strong need for control, he developed an elaborate bureaucracy. In September 1927, Himmler told Hitler of his vision to transform the SS into a loyal, powerful, racially pure elite unit. Convinced that Himmler was the man for the job, Hitler appointed him Deputy Reichsführer-SS, with the rank of SS Oberführer. Around this time, Himmler joined the Ottoman League, a Volkisch youth group. There he met Rudolf Höss, who was later commandant of Auschwitz concentration camp, and Walter Dahr, whose book, The Peasantry as a Life Source of the Nordic Race, caught Hitler's attention, leading to his later appointment as Reich Minister of Food and Agriculture. Dahr was a firm believer in the superiority of the Nordic race, and his philosophy was a major influence on Himmler.
Rise in the SS.
Upon the resignation of SS Commander Reinhard Heydrich in 1929, Himmler assumed the position of Reichsführer-SS with Hitler's approval. He still carried out his duties at propaganda headquarters. One of his first responsibilities was to organize SS participants at the Nuremberg rally that September. Over the next year, Himmler grew the SS from a force of about 290 men to about 3,000. By 1930 Himmler had persuaded Hitler to run the SS as a separate organization, although it was still subordinate to the SA. To gain political power, the NSDAP took advantage of the economic downturn during the Great Depression. The coalition government of the Weimar Republic was unable to improve the economy, so many voters turned to the NSDAP. Hitler used populist rhetoric, including blaming scapegoats, particularly the Jews, for the economic hardships. In the 1932 election, the Nazis won 37.3% of the vote and 230 seats in the Reichstag. Hitler led a short-lived coalition government and was appointed Chancellor of Germany by President Paul von Hindenburg on January 30, 1933. Hindenburg appointed Hermann Göring as Minister without Portfolio, Minister of the Interior for Prussia, and Reich Commissioner of Aviation, and named Wilhelm Frick as Reich Interior Minister. Less than a month later, the Reichstag building was set on fire. Hitler took advantage of this event, forcing von Hindenburg to sign the Reichstag fire decree, which suspended basic rights and allowed detention without trial. The Enabling Act, passed by the Reichstag in 1933, gave Hitler and his party full legislative powers, and the country became a de facto dictatorship. After the death of von Hindenburg in August 1934, the Reichstag appointed Hitler Führer und Reichskanzler, leader and chancellor. He thus became head of state as well as head of government. The post of president was eliminated. The Nazi Party's rise to power provided Himmler and the SS an unfettered opportunity to thrive. By 1933, the SS numbered 52,000 members. Strict membership requirements ensured that all members were of Hitler's Aryan Herrenvolk, Aryan master race. Applicants were vetted for Nordic qualities, in Himmler's words, like a nursery gardener trying to reproduce a good old strain which has been adulterated and debased. We started from the principles of plant selection and then proceeded quite unashamedly to weed out the men whom we did not think we could use for the build-up of the SS. Few dared mention that by his own standards, Himmler did not meet his own ideals. Himmler's organized, bookish intellect served him well as he began setting up different SS departments. In 1931 he appointed Reinhard Heydrich chief of the new Service, Intelligence Service, which was renamed the Sicherheitsdienst, ST, Security Service, in 1932. He later officially appointed Heydrich his deputy. The two men had a good working relationship and a mutual respect. In 1933, they began to remove the SS from SA control. Along with Interior Minister Frick, they hoped to create a unified German police force. In March 1933, Reich Governor of Bavaria Franz Ritter von Epp appointed Himmler chief of the Munich police. Himmler appointed Heydrich commander of Department 4, the political police. That same year, Hitler promoted Himmler to the rank of SS Obergruppenführer, equal in rank to the senior SA commanders. Thereafter, Himmler and Heydrich took over the political police of state after state. Soon only Prussia was controlled by Göring. Himmler further established the SS Race in Settlement Main Office, Race und Siedlungshauptamt or RUSHA, a racist and anti-Semitic organization. He appointed Dahr as its first chief, with the rank of SS Gruppenführer. The department implemented racial policies and monitored the racial integrity of the SS membership. SS men were carefully vetted for their racial background. On December 31, 1931, Himmler introduced the marriage order, which required SS men wishing to marry to produce family trees proving that both families were of Aryan descent to 1800. If any non-Aryan forebears were found in either family tree during the racial investigation, the person concerned was excluded from the SS. Each man was issued a Sippenbuch, a genealogical record detailing his genetic history. Himmler expected that each SS marriage should produce at least 4 children, thus creating a pool of genetically superior prospective SS members. The program had disappointing results. Less than 40% of SS men married and each produced only about 1 child. In March 1933, less than 3 months after the Nazis seized power, Himmler set up the first official concentration camp at Dachau. Hitler had stated that he did not want it to be just another prison or detention camp. Himmler appointed Third Reich, a convicted felon and ardent Nazi, to run the camp in June 1933. Reich devised a system that was used as a model for future camps throughout Germany. Its features included isolation of victims from the outside world, elaborate roll calls and work details, the use of force and executions to extract obedience, and a strict disciplinary code for the guards. Uniforms were issued for prisoners and guards alike. The guards' uniforms had a special Totenkopf, death's head, insignia on their collars. By the end of 1934, Himmler took control of the camps under the aegis of the SS, creating a separate division, the SS Totenkopfverband. Initially the camps housed political opponents. Over time, undesirable members of German society, criminals, vagrants, deviants, were placed in the camps as well. A Hitler decree issued in December 1937 allowed for the incarceration of anyone deemed by the regime to be an undesirable member of society. This included Jews, gypsies, communists, and those persons of any other cultural, racial, political, or religious affiliation deemed by the Nazis to be Untermensch, subhuman. Thus, the camps became a mechanism for social and racial engineering. By the outbreak of World War II in autumn 1939, there were 6 camps housing some 27,000 inmates. Death tolls were high.
Consolidation of power.
In early 1934, Hitler and other Nazi leaders became concerned that Rome was planning a coup d'état. Rome had socialist and populist views, and believed that the real revolution had not yet begun. He felt that the SA, now numbering some 3 million men, should become the sole arms-bearing corps of the state, and that the army should be absorbed into the SA under his leadership. Rome lobbied Hitler to appoint him Minister of Defense, a position held by conservative General Werner von Blumberg. Göring had created a Prussian secret police force, the Geheimstaatspolizei or Gestapo in November 1933, and appointed Rudolf Diels as its head. Göring, concerned that Diels was not ruthless enough to use the Gestapo effectively to counteract the power of the SA, handed over its control to Himmler on April 20, 1934. Also on that date, Hitler appointed Himmler chief of all German police outside Prussia. Heydrich, named chief of the Gestapo by Himmler on April 22, 1934, also continued as head of the SD. Hitler decided on June 21 that Rome and the SA leadership had to be eliminated. He sent Göring to Berlin on June 29 to meet with Himmler and Heydrich to plan the action. Hitler took charge in Munich, where Rome was arrested. He gave Rome the choice to commit suicide or be shot. When Rome refused to kill himself, he was shot dead by 2 SS officers. Between 85 to 200 members of the SA leadership and other political adversaries, including Gregor Strasser, were killed between June 30 and July 2, 1934 in these actions, known as the Night of the Long Knives. With the SA thus neutralized, the SS became an independent organization from July 20, 1934. Himmler's title of Reichsführer-SS became the highest formal SS rank, answerable only to Hitler. The SA was converted into a sports and training organization. On September 15, 1935, Hitler presented 2 laws, known as the Nuremberg Laws, to the Reichstag. The laws banned marriage between non-Jewish and Jewish Germans and forbade the employment of non-Jewish women under the age of 45 in Jewish households. The laws also deprived so-called non-Aryans of the benefits of German citizenship. These laws were among the first race-based measures instituted by the Third Reich. Himmler and Heydrich wanted to extend the power of the SS. Thus, they urged Hitler to form a national police force overseen by the SS, to guard Nazi Germany against its many enemies at the time, real and imagined. Interior Minister Frick also wanted a national police force, but one controlled by him, with Kurt Deuge as his police chief. Hitler left it to Himmler and Heydrich to work out arrangements with Frick. Himmler and Heydrich had greater bargaining power, as they were allied with Frick's old enemy, Göring. Heydrich drew up a set of proposals and Himmler sent him to meet with Frick. An angry Frick then consulted with Hitler, who told him to agree to the proposals. Frick acquiesced, and on June 17, 1936 Hitler decreed the unification of all police forces in the Reich, and named Himmler Chief of German Police. In this role, Himmler was still nominally subordinate to Frick. In practice, however, the police was now effectively a division of the SS, and hence independent of Frick's control. This move gave Himmler operational control over Germany's entire detective force. He also gained authority over all of Germany's uniformed law enforcement agencies, which were amalgamated into the new Ordnungspolizei, Orpo, Order Police, which became a branch of the SS under Deuge. Shortly thereafter, Himmler created the Kriminalpolizei, Kripo, Criminal Police, merging it with the Gestapo into the Sicherheitspolizei, SiPo, Security Police, under Heydrich's command. In September 1939, following the outbreak of World War II, Himmler formed the SS Reichssicherheitsschutzstaffel, RSHA, Reich Main Security Office, to bring the SiPo, which included the Gestapo and Kripo, and the SD together under one umbrella. He again placed Heydrich in command. Under Himmler's leadership, the SS developed its own military branch, the SS Verfügungstruppe, SSVT, which later evolved into the Waffen-SS. Nominally under the authority of Himmler, the Waffen-SS developed a fully militarized structure of command and operations. It grew from 3 regiments to over 38 divisions during World War II, serving alongside the Heer, Army, but never being formally part of it. In addition to his military ambitions, Himmler established the beginnings of a parallel economy under the umbrella of the SS. To this end, Administrator Oswald Pohl set up the Deutsche Wirtschaftsbetrieb, German economic enterprise, in 1940. Under the auspices of the SS Economy and Administration Head Office, this holding company owned housing corporations, factories, and publishing houses. Pohl was unscrupulous and quickly exploited the companies for personal gain. In contrast, Himmler was very honest in matters of money and business. In 1938, as part of his preparations for war, Hitler ended the German alliance with China, and entered into an agreement with the more modern Japan. That same year, Austria was unified with Nazi Germany in the Anschluss, and the Munich Agreement gave Nazi Germany control over the Sudetenland, part of Czechoslovakia. Hitler's primary motivations for war included obtaining additional Lebensraum, living space for the Germanic peoples, who were considered racially superior according to Nazi ideology. A second goal was the elimination of those considered racially inferior, particularly the Jews and Slavs, from territories controlled by the Reich. From 1933 to 1938, hundreds of thousands of Jews emigrated to the United States, Palestine, Great Britain, and other countries. Some converted to Christianity.
World War II.
When Hitler and his army chiefs asked for a pretext for the invasion of Poland in 1939, Himmler, Heydrich, and Heinrich Müller masterminded and carried out a false flag project codenamed Operation Himmler. German soldiers dressed in Polish uniforms undertook border skirmishes that deceptively suggested Polish aggression against Germany. The incidents were then used in Nazi propaganda to justify the invasion of Poland, the opening event of World War II. At the beginning of the war against Poland, Hitler authorized the killing of Polish civilians, including Jews and ethnic Poles. The Einsatzgruppen, SS task forces, had been originally formed by Heydrich to secure government papers and offices in areas taken over by Germany before World War II. Authorized by Hitler and under the direction of Himmler and Heydrich, the Einsatzgruppen units, now repurposed as death squads, followed the Heer, Army, into Poland, and by the end of 1939 they had murdered some 65,000 intellectuals and other civilians. Militias and tier units also took part in these killings. Under Himmler's orders via the RSHA, these squads were also tasked with rounding up Jews and others for placement in ghettos and concentration camps. Germany subsequently invaded France, Denmark and Norway, and the Netherlands, and began bombing Great Britain in preparation for an invasion. On June 21, 1941, the day before invasion of the Soviet Union, Himmler commissioned the preparation of the General General Plan for the East. The plan was finalized in July 1942. It called for the Baltic states, Poland, Western Ukraine, and Byelorussia to be conquered and resettled by 10 million German citizens. The current residents, some 31 million people, would be expelled further east, starved, or used for forced labor. The plan would have extended the border of Germany 1,000 kilometers to the east, 620 miles. Himmler expected that it would take 20 to 30 years to complete the plan, at a cost of 67 billion Reichsmarks. Himmler stated openly, "It is a question of existence, thus it will be a racial struggle of pitiless severity, in the course of which 20 to 30 million Slavs and Jews will perish through military actions and crises of food supply." Himmler, declaring that the war in the East was a pan-European crusade to defend the traditional values of old Europe from the godless Bolshevik hordes, attracted volunteers from all over Europe for the Waffen-SS. He initially selected recruits from Northern and Western Europe, from Scandinavia, Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, Flanders, the Netherlands, and Switzerland, that he thought to be racially closest to Germans. Spain and Italy also provided men for Waffen-SS units. Among Western countries, the number of volunteers varied from a high of 50,000 from the Netherlands to 300 each from Sweden and Switzerland. From the East, the highest number of men came Lithuania, 50,000, and the lowest from Bulgaria, 600. After 1943, most men from the East were conscripts. The performance of the Eastern Waffen-SS units was, as a whole, substandard. In the fall of 1941, Hitler named Heydrich as Deputy Reich Protector of the newly established Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. Heydrich began to racially classify the Czechs, deporting many to concentration camps. Members of a swelling resistance were shot, earning Heydrich the nickname the Butcher of Prague. This appointment strengthened the collaboration between Himmler and Heydrich, and Himmler was proud to have SS control over a state. Despite having direct access to Hitler, Heydrich's loyalty to Himmler remained firm. With Hitler's approval, Himmler re-established the Einsatzgruppen in the lead-up to the planned invasion of the Soviet Union. In March 1941, Hitler addressed his army leaders, detailing his intention to smash the Soviet Empire and destroy the Bolshevik intelligentsia and leadership. His special directive, the Guidelines in Special Spheres Redirective No. 21, Operation Barbarossa, read, "In the operations area of the Army, the Reichsführer-SS has been given special tasks on the orders of the Führer, in order to prepare the political administration. These tasks arise from the forthcoming final struggle of two opposing political systems. Within the framework of these tasks, the Reichsführer-SS acts independently and on his own responsibility." Hitler thus intended to prevent internal friction like that occurring earlier in Poland in 1939. When several German army generals had attempted to bring Einsatzgruppen leaders to trial for the murders they had committed. Following the army into the Soviet Union, the Einsatzgruppen rounded up and killed Jews and others deemed undesirable by the Nazi state. Hitler was sent frequent reports. In addition, 2.8 million Soviet prisoners of war died of starvation, mistreatment, or executions in just 8 months of 1941-42. As many as 500,000 Soviet prisoners of war died or were executed in Nazi concentration camps over the course of the war. Most of them were shot or gassed. By spring 1941, following Himmler's orders, 10 concentration camps had been constructed in which inmates were subjected to forced labor. Jews from all over Germany and the occupied territories were deported to the camps or confined to ghettos. As the Germans were pushed back from Moscow in December 1941, signaling that the invasion of the Soviet Union had failed, Hitler and other Nazi officials realized that mass deportations to the east would no longer be possible. As a result, instead of deportation, many Jews in Europe were destined for death.
The Holocaust.
Nazi racial policies, including the notion that people who were racially inferior had no right to live, date back to the earliest days of the party. Hitler discusses this in Mein Kampf. Somewhere around the time of the German declaration of war on the United States in December 1941, Hitler finally resolved that the Jews of Europe were to be exterminated. Heydrich arranged a meeting, held on January 20, 1942 at Wannsee, a suburb of Berlin. Attended by top Nazi officials, it was used to outline the plans for the final solution to the Jewish question. Heydrich detailed how those Jews able to work would be worked to death. Those unable to work would be killed outright. Heydrich calculated the number of Jews to be killed at 11 million, and told the attendees that Hitler had placed Himmler in charge of the plan. In June 1942, Heydrich was assassinated in Prague in an operation led by Joseph Gabčík and Jan Kubis, members of Czechoslovakia's army in exile who had been trained by the British Special Operations Executive. During the two funeral services, Himmler, the chief mourner, took charge of Heydrich's two young sons, and he gave the eulogy in Berlin. On June 9, after discussions with Himmler and Karl Hermann Frank, Hitler ordered brutal reprisals for Heydrich's death. Over 13,000 people were arrested, and the village of Lidice was razed to the ground. Its male inhabitants and all adults in the village of Lesiki were murdered. At least 1,300 people were executed by firing squads. Himmler took over leadership of the RSHA and stepped up the pace of the killing of Jews in Aktion Reinhard, Operation Reinhard, named in Heydrich's honor. He ordered the Aktion Reinhard camps, the first extermination camps, to be constructed at Balzak, Sobibor, and Treblinka. Initially the victims were killed with gas fans or by firing squad, but these methods proved impracticable for an operation of this scale. In August 1941, Himmler attended the shooting of 100 Jews at Minsk. Nauseated and shaken by the experience, he was concerned about the impact such actions would have on the mental health of his SS men. He decided that alternate methods of killing should be found. On his orders, by spring 1942 the camp at Auschwitz had been greatly expanded, including the addition of gas chambers, where victims were killed using the pesticide Zyklon B. By the end of the war, at least 5.5 million Jews had been killed by the Nazi regime. Most estimates range closer to 6 million. Himmler visited the camp at Sobibor in early 1943, by which time 250,000 people had been killed at that location alone. After witnessing a gassing, he gave 28 people promotions, and ordered the operation of the camp to be wound down. In a revolt that October, prisoners killed most of the guards and SS personnel, and 300 prisoners escaped. 200 managed to get away. Some joined partisan units operating in the area. The remainder were killed. The camp was dismantled by December 1943. Himmler was a main architect of the Holocaust, using his deep belief in the racist Nazi ideology to justify the murder of millions of victims. The Nazis planned to kill Polish intellectuals and restrict non-Germans in the general government and conquered territories to a fourth-grade education. The Nazis wanted to breed a master race of racially pure Nordic Aryans in Germany. As an agronomist and farmer, Himmler was acquainted with the principles of selective breeding, which he proposed to apply to humans. He believed that he could engineer the German populace, for example, through eugenics, to be Nordic in appearance within several decades of the end of the war.
Posen speech.
On October 4, 1943, during a secret meeting with top SS officials in the city of Poznan, and on October 6, 1943, in a speech to the party elite, the Go and Reich leaders, Himmler referred explicitly to the extermination, German, Ausrottung, of the Jewish people. A translated excerpt from the speech of October 4 reads: Hitler's motivation for authorizing Himmler's speeches was to ensure that all party leaders were made aware of these plans and actions. Thus, it would be impossible for them to later deny knowledge of the killings. Because the Allies had indicated that they were going to pursue criminal charges for German war crimes, Hitler tried to gain the loyalty and silence of his subordinates by making them all parties to the planned genocide.
Germanization.
As Reich Commissioner for the Consolidation of German nationhood, Himmler was deeply involved in the Germanization program for the East, particularly Poland. As laid out in the General Plan for the East, the aim was to enslave, expel or exterminate the native population and to make Lebensraum, living space for Volksdeutsch, ethnic Germans. Himmler declared that no drop of German blood would be lost or left behind to mingle with an alien race. Himmler instructed that the German nation should view all foreign workers brought to Germany as a danger to their German blood. In accordance with German racial laws, in cases of sexual relations with Germans and foreigners which was forbidden as Rassenschande, race defilement, if the offender was proved capable of being Germanized after a racial investigation, they were sent to preventive detention depending on the decision of Himmler himself. Himmler continued his plans to colonize the East, even when many Germans were reluctant to relocate there, and despite negative effects on the war effort. Himmler's plans began with the Volksliste, the classification of people deemed of German blood. These included Germans who had collaborated with Germany before the war, but also those who considered themselves German but had been neutral. Those who were partially Polonized but Germanizable. And Germans who were of Polish nationality. Himmler ordered that those who refused to be classified as ethnic Germans should be deported to concentration camps, have their children taken away, or be assigned to forced labor. Himmler's belief that it is in the nature of German blood to resist led to his conclusion that Balts or Slavs who resisted Germanization were racially superior to more compliant ones. The plan also included the kidnapping of Eastern European children by Nazi Germany. Himmler urged the racially valuable children were to be removed from all contact with Poles, and raised as Germans, with German names. Himmler declared, "We have faith above all in this our own blood, which has flowed into a foreign nationality through the vicissitudes of German history. We are convinced that our own philosophy and ideals will reverberate in the spirit of these children who racially belong to us." The children were to be adopted by German families. Children who passed muster at first but were later rejected were taken to a ghetto in Lodz, where most of them eventually died. By January 1943, Himmler reported that 629,000 ethnic Germans had been resettled. However, most resettled Germans did not live in the envisioned small farms, but in temporary camps or quarters in towns. 500,000 residents of the annexed Polish territories, as well as from Slovenia, Alsace, Lorraine, and Luxembourg were deported to the general government or sent to Germany as slave labor.
20 July plot.
On July 20, 1944, a group of German army officers led by Claus von Stauffenberg and including some of the highest-ranked members of the German armed forces attempted to assassinate Hitler, but failed to do so. The next day, Himmler formed a special commission that arrested over 5,000 suspected and known opponents of the regime. Hitler ordered brutal reprisals that resulted in the execution of more than 4,900 people. Though Himmler was embarrassed by his failure to uncover the plot, it led to an increase in his powers and authority. General Friedrich Fromm, Commander-in-Chief of the Reserve, or Replacement, Army, Ersatzheer, and Stauffenberg's immediate superior, was one of those implicated in the conspiracy. Hitler removed Fromm from his post and named Himmler as his successor. Since the reserve army consisted of 2 million men, Himmler hoped to draw on these reserves to fill posts within the Waffen-SS. He appointed Hans Juttner, director of the SS Leadership Main Office, as his deputy, and began to fill top reserve army posts with SS men. By November 1944, Himmler had merged the Army Officer Recruitment Department with that of the Waffen-SS and had successfully lobbied for an increase in the quotas for recruits to the SS. By this time, Hitler had appointed Himmler as Minister of the Interior and Plenipotentiary General for Administration, Generalbevollmächtigter für die Verwaltung. In August 1944, Hitler authorized him to restructure the organization and administration of the Waffen-SS, the army, and the police services. As head of the Reserve Army, Himmler was now responsible for prisoners of war. He was also in charge of the Wehrmacht penal system, and controlled the development of Wehrmacht armaments until January 1945.
Military commander.
On June 6, 1944, the Western Allied armies landed in northern France during Operation Overlord. In response, Army Group Upper Rhine, Heeresgruppe Oberrhein, group was formed to engage the advancing U.S. 7th Army, under command of General Alexander Patch, and French First Army, led by General Jean de Lattre de Tassigny, in the Alsace region along the west bank of the Rhine. In late 1944, Hitler appointed Himmler Commander-in-Chief of Army Group Upper Rhine. On September 26, 1944, Hitler ordered Himmler to create special army units, the Volkssturm, People's Storm. All men between the ages of 16 and 60 were required to join, over the protests of Armaments Minister Albert Speer, who noted that irreplaceable skilled workers were being removed from armaments production. In October 1944, children as young as 14 were being enlisted. Because of severe shortages in weapons and equipment and lack of training, members of the Volkssturm were poorly prepared for combat, and about 175,000 of them lost their lives in the final months of the war. On January 1, 1945, Hitler and his generals launched Operation Northwind, Unternehmen Nordwind. The goal was to break through the lines of the U.S. 7th Army and French First Army to support the southern thrust in the Ardennes Offensive, the final major German offensive of the war. After limited initial gains by the Germans, the Americans halted the offensive. By January 25, Operation Northwind had officially ended. On January 25, 1945, in spite of Himmler's lack of military experience, Hitler appointed him as commander of a hastily formed army group Vistula, Heeresgruppe to halt the Soviet Red Army's Vistula-Oder offensive into Pomerania. Himmler established his command center at Schneidemühl, using his special train, Sonderzugsteiermark, as his headquarters. The train had only one telephone line, inadequate maps, and no signal detachment or radios with which to establish communication and relay military orders. Himmler seldom left the train, only worked about 4 hours per day, and insisted on a daily massage and a lengthy nap afterwards. He was unable to devise any viable plans for completion of the military objectives. Under pressure from Hitler over the worsening military situation, Himmler became anxious and unable to give incoherent reports. Hitler was unwilling to admit that his choice of commander had been inadequate. After an intense argument with General Heinz Guderian, who insisted on a change of command of the Army Group Vistula, Hitler assigned General Walter Wenck to Himmler's headquarters to take over command of a limited counteroffensive. Hitler then observed that it was not possible for him to move the troops needed for Guderian's planned double pincer attack from neighboring regions. When the counterattack failed to stop the Soviet advance, Hitler held Himmler personally liable and accused him of not following orders. Himmler's tenure as a military commander ended on March 20, when Hitler replaced him with General Gotthard Heinrich as Commander-in-Chief of Army Group Vistula. By this time Himmler, who had been under the care of his doctor since February 18, had fled to a sanatorium at Hohenleichen. Hitler sent Guderian on a forced medical leave of absence, and he resigned his post as Chief of Staff to Hans Krebs on March 29. Himmler's failure and Hitler's response marked a serious deterioration in the relationship between the two men. By that time, the inner circle of people which Hitler trusted was rapidly shrinking.
Peace negotiations.
In the spring of 1945, Germany's chances of winning the war and Himmler's relationship with Hitler had both deteriorated. Himmler, therefore, considered independently negotiating a peace settlement. His Monsieur, Felix Kirsten, who had moved to Sweden, acted as an intermediary in negotiations with Count Folke Bernadotte, head of the Swedish Red Cross. Letters were exchanged between the two men, and direct meetings were arranged by Walter Schellenberg of the RSHA. Himmler and Hitler met for the last time on April 20, 1945, Hitler's birthday, in Berlin, and Himmler swore total loyalty to Hitler. At a military briefing on that day, Hitler stated that he would not be leaving Berlin, in spite of Soviet advances. Along with Göring, Himmler quickly left the city after the briefing. On April 21, Himmler met with Norbert Maser, a Swedish representative of the World Jewish Congress, to discuss the release of Jewish concentration camp inmates. As a result of these negotiations, about 20,000 people were released in the White Buses operation. During the negotiations, Himmler falsely claimed that the crematoria had been built to deal with the dead from a typhus epidemic. He also claimed very high survival rates for the camps at Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen, even as these sites were liberated, and it became obvious that his figures were false. 2 days later, Himmler met directly with Bernadotte at the Swedish consulate in Lübeck. Representing himself as the provisional leader of Germany, he claimed that Hitler would be dead within the next few days. Hoping that the British and Americans would fight the Soviets alongside the remains of the Wehrmacht, Himmler asked Bernadotte to inform General Dwight Eisenhower that Germany wished to surrender to the West. Bernadotte asked Himmler to put his proposal in writing, and Himmler obliged. However, Göring sent a telegram a few hours earlier, asking permission to take over the leadership of the Reich, an act that Hitler, under the prodding of Martin Bormann, interpreted as a demand to step down or face a coup. On the evening of April 28, the BBC broadcast a Reuters news report about Himmler's attempted negotiations with the Western Allies. Hitler, who had long believed Himmler was second only to Joseph Goebbels in loyalty, calling Himmler Der True Heinrich, the loyal Heinrich, flew into a rage about this apparent betrayal. Hitler ordered Himmler's arrest and had Hermann Fegelein, Himmler's SS representative at Hitler's headquarters in Berlin, shot. Hitler told those who were still with him in the bunker complex that Himmler's act was the worst act of treachery he had ever known. By this time, the Soviets had advanced to the Potsdamer Platz, only 330 yards, from the Reich Chancellery, and were preparing to storm the Chancellery. This report, combined with Himmler's treachery, prompted Hitler to write his last will and testament. In the testament, completed on April 29, one day prior to his suicide, Hitler declared both Himmler and Göring to be traitors. He stripped Himmler of all of his party and state offices and expelled him from the Nazi Party. Hitler named Grand Admiral Karl Donitz as his successor. Himmler met Donitz in Flensburg and offered himself as second in command. He maintained that he was entitled to a position in Donitz's interim government as Reichsführer-SS, believing the SS would be in a good position to restore and maintain order after the war. Donitz repeatedly rejected Himmler's overtures, and initiated peace negotiations with the Allies. He wrote a letter on May 6, 2 days before the German instrument of surrender, formally dismissing Himmler from all his posts.
Capture and death.
Unwanted by his former colleagues and hunted by the Allies, Himmler attempted to go into hiding. He had not made extensive preparations for this, but he had equipped himself with a forged paybook under the name of Sergeant Heinrich Himmler. With a small band of companions, he headed south on May 11 to Friedrichskoog, without a final destination in mind. They continued on to Neuhaus, where the group split up. Himmler and 2 aides were stopped at a checkpoint on May 21 and detained. Over the following 2 days he was moved around to several camps, and was brought to the British 31st Civilian Interrogation Camp near Lüneburg on May 23. The duty officer, Captain Sylvester, began a routine interrogation. Himmler admitted who he was, and Sylvester had the prisoner searched. He was taken to the headquarters of the 2nd British Army in Lüneburg, where Dr. Wells conducted a medical exam. The doctor attempted to examine the inside of Himmler's mouth, but the prisoner was reluctant to open it and jerked his head away. Himmler then bit into a hidden cyanide pill and collapsed onto the floor. He was dead within 15 minutes. Shortly afterward, Himmler's body was buried in an unmarked grave near Lüneburg. The precise location of the grave remains unknown.
Mysticism and symbolism.
Himmler was interested in mysticism and the occult from an early age. He tied this interest into his racist philosophy, looking for proof of Aryan and Nordic racial superiority from ancient times. He promoted a cult of ancestor worship, particularly among members of the SS, as a way to keep the race pure and provide immortality to the nation. Viewing the SS as an order along the lines of the Teutonic Knights, he had them take over the Church of the Teutonic Order in Vienna in 1939. He began the process of replacing Christianity with a new moral code that rejected humanitarianism and challenged the Christian concept of marriage. The Onenherb, a research society founded by Himmler in 1935, conducted research all over the globe to look for proof of the superiority and ancient origins of the Germanic race. All regalia and uniforms of Nazi Germany, particularly those of the SS, used symbolism in their design. The SS adopted runic symbols, chosen by Himmler, as insignia. The stylized lightning bolt SS runes were derived from the Armanen runes of Guido von List, which he had loosely based on the indigenous runic alphabets of the Germanic peoples. Himmler modified a variety of existing customs to emphasize the elitism and central role of the SS. An SS naming ceremony was to replace baptism, marriage ceremonies were to be altered, a separate SS funeral ceremony was to be held in addition to Christian ceremonies, and SS-centric celebrations of the summer and winter solstice were instituted. The Totenkopf, death's head, symbol, used by German military units for hundreds of years, had been chosen for the SS by Schreck. Himmler placed particular importance on the death's head rings. They were never to be sold, and were to be returned to him upon the death of the owner. He interpreted the death's head symbol to mean solidarity to the cause and a commitment unto death.
Relationship with Hitler.
As second in command of the SS and then Reichsführer-SS, Himmler was in regular contact with Hitler to arrange for SS men as bodyguards. Himmler was not involved with Nazi party policy-making decisions in the years leading up to the seizure of power. From the late 1930s, the SS was independent of the control of other state agencies or government departments, and he reported only to Hitler. Hitler's leadership style was to give contradictory orders to subordinates and to place them into positions where their duties and responsibilities overlapped with those of others. In this way, Hitler fostered distrust, competition, and infighting among his subordinates to consolidate and maximize his own power. His cabinet never met after 1938, and he discouraged his ministers from meeting independently. Hitler typically did not issue written orders, but gave them verbally at meetings or in phone conversations. He also had Bormann convey orders. Bormann used his position to control the flow of information and access to Hitler, earning him enemies, including Himmler. Hitler promoted and practiced the Führer principle. The principle required absolute obedience of all subordinates to their superiors. Thus Hitler viewed the government structure as a pyramid, with himself, the infallible leader, at the apex. Accordingly, Himmler placed himself in a position of subservience to Hitler, and was unconditionally obedient to him. However, he, like other top Nazi officials, had aspirations to one day succeed Hitler as leader of the Reich. Himmler considered Speer to be an especially dangerous rival, both in the Reich administration and as a potential successor to Hitler. Speer refused to accept Himmler's offer of the high rank of SS Oberstgruppenführer, as he felt to do so would put him in Himmler's debt and obligate him to allow Himmler a say in armaments production. Hitler called Himmler's mystical and pseudo-religious interests nonsense. Himmler was not a member of Hitler's inner circle. The two men were not very close, and rarely saw each other socially. Himmler socialized almost exclusively with other members of the SS. His unconditional loyalty and efforts to please Hitler earned him the nickname of Der Treue Heinrich, the faithful Heinrich. In the last days of the war, when it became clear that Hitler planned to die in Berlin, Himmler left his longtime superior to try to save himself.
Marriage and family.
Himmler met his future wife, Marguerite Boden, in 1927. 7 years his senior, she was a nurse who shared his interest in herbal medicine and homeopathy, and was part owner of a small private clinic. They were married in July 1928, and their only child, Gudrun, was born on August 8, 1929. The couple were also foster parents to a boy named Gerhard von A., son of an SS officer who had died before the war. Marguerite sold her share of the clinic and used the proceeds to buy a plot of land in Waldtrudering, near Munich, where they put up a prefabricated house. Himmler was constantly away on party business, so his wife took charge of their efforts, mostly unsuccessful, to raise livestock for sale. After the Nazis seized power, the family moved first to Mullstrasse in Munich, and in 1934 to Lake Tegern, where they bought a house. Himmler also later obtained a large house in the Berlin suburb of Dahlem free of charge as an official residence. The couple saw little of each other as Himmler became totally absorbed by work. The relationship was strained. The couple did unite for social functions. They were frequent guests at the Heydrich home. Marguerite saw it as her duty to invite the wives of the senior SS leaders over for afternoon coffee and tea on Wednesday afternoons. Hedwig Pothest, Himmler's young secretary starting in 1936, became his mistress by 1939. She left her job in 1941. He arranged accommodations for her, first in Mecklenburg, and later at Berchtesgaden. He fathered 2 children with her, a son, Helge, born 1942, and a daughter, Nanette Dorothea, born 1944 at Berchtesgaden. Marguerite, by then living in GMUND with her daughter, learned of the relationship sometime in 1941. She and Himmler were already separated, and she decided to tolerate the relationship for the sake of her daughter. Working as a nurse for the Red Cross during the war, Marguerite was appointed supervisor in Military District 3, Berlin-Brandenburg. Himmler was close to his first daughter, Gudrun, whom he nicknamed Puppy, Dolly. He phoned her every few days and visited as often as he could. Hedwig and Marguerite both remained loyal to Himmler. Writing to Gebhard in February 1945, Marguerite said, "How wonderful that he has been called to great tasks and is equal to them. The whole of Germany is looking to him." Hedwig expressed similar sentiments in a letter to Himmler in January. Marguerite and Gudrun left GMUND as Allied troops advanced into the area. They were arrested by American troops in Bolzano, Italy, and held in various internment camps in Italy, France, and Germany. They were brought to Nuremberg to testify at the trials, and were released in November 1946. Gudrun emerged from the experience embittered by her alleged mistreatment and has remained devoted to her father's memory.
Historical views.
Albert Speer notes that though Himmler seemed pedantic and insignificant on the surface, he was a good decision-maker, had a talent for selecting highly competent staff, and successfully inserted the SS into every aspect of daily life. Historian Peter Longerich observes that Himmler's ability to consolidate his ever-increasing powers and responsibilities into a coherent system under the auspices of the SS led him to become one of the most powerful men in the Third Reich. Historian Wolfgang Sauer says that although he was pedantic, dogmatic, and dull, Himmler emerged under Hitler as second in actual power. His strength lay in a combination of unusual shrewdness, burning ambition, and servile loyalty to Hitler. Historian Peter Padfield opined that Himmler appeared the most powerful man under Hitler. It is impossible to say whether he was in practice, and meaningless to ask, since he was never prepared to use his power directly to change the course of events. Historian John Toland relates a story by Gunter Syrup, a subordinate of Heydrich. Heydrich showed him a picture of Himmler and said, "The top half is a teacher but the lower half is the sadist." Historian Adrian Will comments that Himmler and the SS followed Hitler's policies, without question or ethical considerations. Himmler accepted Hitler and Nazi ideology, and saw the SS as a chivalric Teutonic order of new Germans. Himmler adopted the doctrine of Auftragstaktik, mission command, whereby orders were given as broad directives, with authority delegated downward to the appropriate level to carry them out in a timely and efficient manner. Will states that the SS ideology gave the men a doctrinal framework, and the mission command tactics allowed the junior officers leeway to act on their own initiative to obtain the desired results. According to British War Cabinet minutes released in 2006, Winston Churchill advocated Himmler's assassination. In response to Himmler's attempts to open peace overtures with the Allies in 1945 through Count Bernadotte, Churchill inquired if they should negotiate with Himmler and bumped him off later. "Quite entitled to do so," said Churchill. This suggestion met with some support from the British Home Office. Historian Ian Kershaw observes that many Nazis seemed to have a psychological block at the end of the regime, refusing to recognize their responsibility for the barbaric actions that occurred during the Third Reich. They lacked self-awareness, and the moral value system had completely collapsed. In 2008, the German news magazine Der Spiegel described Himmler as one of the most brutal mass murderers in history, and the architect of the Holocaust.